What, Chris? I'm glad it said recording in progress. Because I suddenly had this moment that, you know, oh, there's are we supposed to be recording these for everybody else? I didn't. That's the danger of giving me power, making me a co-host of anything. You know, things will go terribly, terribly, terribly wrong. Okay, so we've got, oh, blimey, we've got a lot of people joining us. Fantastic. Now, obviously, this is the Ask Me Anything Q&A type session on mapping. So for people joining, there is no open questions at the moment. Please, you'll find there's a Q&A section. So if you've got questions, throw them in there. And what Chris and I will try and do is get to try and answer as many as possible. And on top of that, you know, I've also opened chat, so I can see that as well. And of course, we're in the round window, so I've got the round window chat open. So I'll keep an eye on that. And also, there's far too many channels. I've got Twitter open. My problem is I don't have enough real estate. I've only got 2 screens. I should have had a third. I need to get a fourth, just to cope with a load of, or just a plug in the back of my head. Sorry to be confused. Okay, so Chris, where should we start? Oh, we've had one. Have you applied China mapping to politics, e.g. Brexit, Northern Ireland, Protocol, and China? Gosh. Oh, now that's really interesting. So the answer, I used mapping itself to look at different competition between different nation states. This was many years ago, back in 2014, 2015. So it was looking at different lines of different industries, such as the automotive, aeronautical industry, and several others, looking at the state of how evolved it was, identifying the patterns, the gameplay that China used, made comparisons to, for example, the US play. The US play was mostly market driven, not a great deal of understanding of the supply chain. China's been playing a very gifted game of identifying components in the supply chain which are industrializing where possible, use of special economic zones, a mixed market model, then moving up the stack. Much more skillful. So I wrote this particular paper which said about how China was going to dominate all these different areas, and mostly it was read by a lot of companies in the US who were like, well, it's just we'll allow us to innovate, but there has been some very skillful play, and I think the comment by the ex CTO for the I think it was Pentagon that China's won the AI battle is pretty much on the money. I mean. But more than just things like the change of the components and the system and the gameplay, I also got into mapping culture. And so, when we talk about politics between nations, so when we talk about competition is the act of everybody seeking together, seeking a resource, seeking some knowledge. This is what competition means. I mean, we can do it in several different ways. We can do it in conflicts and we fight each other. We're going for the same prize, but we'll beat each other up along the way. Or we can work together, cooperation, or we can labor together, collaboration, or we can, co-create something together. So all of these co-creation, collaboration, cooperation are just strategies of competition, and often on a map you'll use sort of many at the same time. And so when you think about nation states and we're in competition with others, we collaborate sometimes, we have conflict at other times. We often talk about it in terms of our physical sovereignty. Here's our border in our society, inside our border, whatever, war if necessary, is our values, our behaviors, our collective. And sometimes that conflict spills over into people invading other people's borders and all that sort of stuff, the horror of war. But most of that is all about imposition of behaviors and values onto another geographical region. Well, you see this sort of gameplay going on in the economic world as well, because conflict is like the lowest form of war. The highest form of war is just to persuade everybody else that they are you. If you can turn everybody else into you, it's the simplest way. And so we're seeing a lot of this stuff in terms of embedding of values into AI and you know, even like video games, the use of art forms to manipulate values or behaviors. So, you know, have you applied mapping to politics? You can do. I've certainly done it in terms of competition. God, that was a very long-winded way of answering that question. Chris, any thoughts on that particular subject?
I think you have covered it all.
Oh, that's very kind of you. Very, very kind of you. So should we pick another one? Do you want?
Okay, so I can take the next one, which is is it usual when people start mapping to put too much detail on the map? And from my experience, from my workshops, it's pretty natural. And what you will often see, you will see people scared of putting too many components. And what that indicates is that you haven't yet spent enough of time experimenting with the reality to figure out which of those components are really important for your situation. So it's perfectly normal to go as deep as possible during the first pass, only to learn later that majority of those components weren't necessary and create a second version of a map, which will be much cleaner, much easier to digest, and much easier to reuse from that point in time. But first attempts are always messy. And frankly, I haven't seen many people who are brave enough to share their first version of a map. What we usually see are very polished versions of representing a large or a long thinking process.
So hang on a second. I'm just getting a note from Jane. Apparently there's some little issues with the VFairs platform. So apologies for those people who are actually, well, yeah, I can't apologize to them. They're missing it here. I'm just going to tell Jane there's 165 of us in the session. Right, so in the session, terrible typing on my part. So I find this quite common, is people say to me, I've created a map, oh, it's just too complicated. I mean, there's just too many components on it as well. And I think it is a perfectly normal exercise of putting too much on and then taking bits off and putting them on sub maps and then realizing you need a component, because it's about exploration. What I'm always a little bit, shall we say, surprised by, is the bit where people go, there's too much on a map, I can't manage it. Because that's the bit where you just go, well, hang on, you know, those components are there. Whether you know, they don't disappear because you decide not to look at them. It's a bit like, oh, this is way too complicated for me to deal with this situation. Let's not do the map. It's just like, well, how else are you going to manage it? I mean, you know, sometimes it's as simple as just get a bigger piece of paper. Most of the time, it is a case of throw components off, take, simplify, etc. So that's perfectly normal.
Yeah, so what I wanted to say is that this is a very interesting, let's say, feature of a map. Because what I find is that very often you will find that there is more components that influence your situation that you can process in any given time frame. Frankly, if you were to map everything that influences your business, you would have probably to create a map of the entire world. Because something in China may be influencing your position. Sometimes this is possible, sometimes it isn't. And one of the big questions that has been puzzling me for a really long time is whether you can manage your map while knowing that it's very far from perfection and very far from listing all the important components that can list your business. It's like merging together a little bit of risk management, uncertainty, complexity thinking, and mapping, which informs the entire stuff.
All right. Okay. I mean, that's so let me just jump into something. Hang on a second. So I'm just going to share a screen with you. So Chris, can you see that screen?
I can.
Okay. Title of fuel. online Wardley map. So we start off with a component which is the public. Public wants to get from A to B. A to B requires them potentially. We can use pipelines here instead, but let's say petrochemical. That requires us to go to a garage, which requires a tanker, which requires an HGV driver, which requires, because they're specialist licenses, C licenses, which requires an examining body, DVSA, which requires component examiners, which requires training, okay? Now, there's another component is, you don't have to have people getting examined. What you could do is just introduce visas and on the hope that there's a whole bunch of HGV drivers elsewhere in the world who are willing to come here. Now, there's another component in here, which of course the public also want food, and that requires raw materials, and also both of those, the food and the raw materials, require distribution, which is connected to the HGV drivers. Now, another thing the public requires is money. They obviously need that to buy the food, but they also get that from things like work, which possibly could be work as an HGV driver, or they, hopefully you might get it from something like universal basic income, if we ever have universal basic income. Now, of course, onto this, we've got a component, which is the business, and what the business wants to do, it must get profit, and it gets its profit from revenue, hopefully from selling food that we all love, or maybe not. But at the same time, it has cost associated with raw materials, work, and distribution, and it has another cost, which is tax, which we actually need to fund the DVSA and also UBI as well, if we ever get to UBI. Now, the point about this is a really, it's starting to already build up many different components. This was a group of 4 people just chatting in total, I think it was 27 minutes about the fuel crisis. And while they were chatting, I'm sitting there typing. And the only reason why it's only this complex is because that is the speed at which I can type. I mean, it's just because I'm just lousy at typing. But the thing is, one of the things I like about that is you've got many different components, and we can now discuss about missing components and things that are not on here. We can have that sort of discussion and argument, not attacking each other, but attacking the map, saying that there's something wrong with the map or whatever else it is. We can add new components into there. But, this was a conversation which I had, I don't know, maybe a week ago. And I know that I can just bring up this map. Oh, I'm getting lots of chat messages in here. Sorry. Let me hide the chat messages. Let's move that out of the way. The point is, I can have this conversation about this particular space, and I know I can go back to it in 6 months' time. And just within a few minutes of looking at the map, be straight back at the conversation that I had beforehand. I do this with, we had one which is the UN Reducing Global Poverty, which links all the way through all weather roads, all the way down to the statistics organizations and the different systems. And simply by just looking at that map, I can be back in the meeting where we were, back in that sort of discussion. And I can't do that with normal meetings. Normal meetings, if I don't have a map, I spend at least the first, 30 minutes, 40 minutes maybe, trying to remember where we were in the past meeting. And the level of detail is nowhere near the concentration that I get with a map. So I understand that it's complicated, people add too many terms and all the rest of it. It's very imperfect, but even imperfect map like this, and it is very imperfect, I find is useful. At least moves the conversation forward. What do you think?
It does. But there was, it's not up. So I'm having difficulties finding the right words, because it's not that the map is complex. It's just the inability to contain all the knowledge that influences, or all the components that influence a situation within a map in a reasonable time frame. Because you could essentially expand any of those components and find that there are like entire underlying value chains, and some of those components in those underlying value chains may be influencing your map. So you are making a trade-off between the level of abstractions of components which you are using in your map, and I would say perceived risk that something inside those components below the abstraction levels will influence your map.
Yeah.
It's like a informed guess or something like that.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, all maps are imperfect representations of space. It's all about trade-off. I mean, I can visually make a choice here. I can decide we can dive down into particular elements like tax or maybe UBI or something along those lines, and we can get into a whole sort of. And I suppose then the question becomes, well, what about analysis paralysis or something along those lines?
Yes, yes.
And that always comes from. But I look at this and I actually find this is even in this format, imperfect as it is, I can say things like, we need to be funding here. People can talk about how we need to turn, drivers into autonomous vehicles or whatever it happens to be. We can talk about a lot of this stuff, even with a very imperfect map. And that took just under 30 minutes. And most of that time was me scribbling down as quick as I can, because I'm not very good at live mapping. Basically, I've got terrible hands, and I'm not a pianist, or I'm very, very bad at typing. But all right, so we've got a whole bunch of other questions, and I know I have a terrible habit of yakking on. Should we pick the next one?
Yep.
In your opinion, are governments fundamentally or less able to adopt some commodity components than the private sector, whether it be existing legislation or otherwise? Okay, so you might have a different opinion to me on this one, Chris. I'm sure we're going to have a different opinion at some point, but I find it hilarious. And the reason why I find it hilarious is that I found duplication and waste in government. And the worst duplication I've ever found is 118 workflow systems doing the same thing. So we've managed to build prisoner registration about 118 different ways. That is peanuts compared to the nonsense I've seen in the private sector. I've got a bank who've managed to build risk management over 1,000 times. I mean, I've got a pharma company which has managed to build 350 different enterprise content management systems. I mean, so the level of duplication and waste and custom building and everything else in the private sector I've always found it vastly more than I found in government. And I think it's because in government, we have things like the National Audit Office, Major Projects Authority. We have some actual testing or some challenge that actually goes on. But in the, I have to say, I found a difference, but it's not a difference that the government is wasteful. The private sector is super efficient. In fact, I found most of the private sector is incredibly wasteful.
So my take, it all depends on which government are you talking about, because commodity components, I mean, if you say something is a commodity, you imply it's widely available. But if you think, for example, about the US situation with Huawei and how this affected, for example, Poland, then it's quite interesting because in government, you cannot use Huawei products because they are effectively banned. And if you think about any other components, there is this angle of national security, and you may not be willing to put foreign components inside your value chains, which at some point in time may be used against you. And for example, if you think about Russia, they have practiced cutting off the entire country from the internet because they wanted to test their own DNS structure, right? This is like where they are actively taking a choice towards not using commodity and standard components because this will serve their safety. But it's rather, again, a matter of trade-off than any broader pattern. But what may be also very interesting is that there is a risk associated with adoption. And if the component is early in the commodity phase, you may perceive that it's very risky, and frankly, plenty of people will do so. And you may want to wait for practices to emerge around those components, for those practices to mature, and only then adopt the components. So I wonder whether is the answer less able to adopt, or perhaps adopting at a different speed. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, so it's not like a direct answer. There are just differences in way of approaching those commodity components.
Okay, so I'm also going to come back and say that I don't think either government or the private sector, in most cases, there are a few exceptions, do a good job of actually understanding their supply chains anyway. Okay,
No, that's right.
I know, and at the same time, anybody in the industry is pretty much admitting that China's won AI over the US. We've got the UK government coming out with its national AI strategy, and I have to say, we don't have much of an industry in that space in comparison. But what I know, I can see where this is going to lead. I mean, we got 43 police forces. I'm sure we're going to end up with 43 custom-built AI solutions, all doing exactly the same thing, but in a completely different way, all paid for through the nose to very expensive management consultants. I hope we don't do it this way, but that sort of waste, and that's the sort of waste you see hits the press and all the rest of it as well. That still is nothing compared to what I see in the private sector. And because the difference is with the private sector, you have the magic carpet. So what we do is we lift up the magic carpet, we sweep it under, and we just pretend it didn't exist. And I in the past, I've seen billion, what was it, 1.2 billion, I think it was, private cloud effort. I sat down and explained to the company I could build it all for 25 million. And they were like, how would you do that? Simple, pay me 25 million. I'll sit on a beach for 5 years. Then you phone me up and I can just say we failed. And that way you'll have saved all the rest of the money. But, they went away and they spent their money. And this sort of stuff is common. All right. Anyway, too much. I'm terrible. Too much chin wagging from me. It's amazing to see resilience, stability, a sustainable society as 3 tracks. This map camp. Thank you very much. Very grateful for you making that comment. If you had a choice to add a 4th one, oh, which theme would you have added? I think I'm in trouble for doing 3 because there's just too many good speakers and too many interesting talks all at the same time. I think it would be terrible to add any more, but resilience, sustainability, society. If I was going to add a 4th one, I really would want to pull out the whole sort of power, exclusion, altruism type discussion into it as well. That's sort of the beliefs and the values. So I probably would have wanted to pull that out. I'm not very good off the top of my head. Chris, which would you have added?
I don't have an opinion about that. The 3 looks more than enough. What I actually could do or would like to do is to add the 4th one focused on purely use cases. It's like, how do you construct a Wardley map and how do you use it in practice for your business? And also for this reason, there will be a next event in about a month focused just on the use cases.
Fantastic. I mean, that's you come up with great ideas. Yes, actually, that would be a fantastic 4th track, actually, use cases. And yes, you've got an event coming up in Germany, I believe, but it's a virtual event.
It's a virtual event, yeah.
When is that? It's in November, isn't it?
Yes, it's in November, and the link is available on the main map camp call UK.
And that's all going to be use cases and everything,
yes.
Things like that. Fantastic.
Yes.
That's one of the beauties I like about the mapping community, because these conferences and events appear all over the place. Small groups often, sometimes larger ones are appearing. It's just fantastic. I cannot stress enough the benefits of sharing. So now we've got another question: how to introduce climate change and low carbon imperative to business maps? Sometimes it seems that we need to go backwards because outsourcing and specialized society mean today a lot of carbon emission. Okay, so this is a really interesting one. One of the patterns that you learn with mapping is as things evolve, they enable higher order systems to appear. And of course, those higher order systems then evolve, enabling higher order systems to appear, and so on and so on. And so what you get is something known as Jevon's paradox. This comes from the coal question. So it was 60, 70, something like that. I've got the book back there somewhere. And so what happened is they made steam engines more efficient, and everybody thought that would mean less coal was needed. Actually, what happened is coal went up because you made steam engines more efficient, so you found more uses for steam. So the problem we've got is as we evolve things, we build higher order systems which always consume more of the underlying components. And as we go up the chain, of course, we're moving from a disordered to an ever more ordered state. And that, basic entropy requires energy. So unfortunately, the net result of competition, whether it's conflict or collaboration or cooperation or co-creation or whatever it is forever going to be building higher order systems, which means we're going to forever need more energy. So our first issue is we've got to, we don't understand our chains most of the time, so we don't know where we're spending, what we're spending. B, we're going to have to accept the fact that we will forever consume more energy. Yes, we can make some efficiency gains and everything else, which is great, but we'll end up consuming more. So we've got to really think about the sources of energy. It's got to all be renewable, etc. And so then we have the other issues, because it's not just carbon, it's all the other resources. We're going to have to, at some point, start having the conversation about consumption and the way that we actually consume things. Because this is one of the things I used to work in the environmental field about 30 years ago. I find, we really still don't have that conversation about, frankly, we cannot consume, forget just about the carbon, we just cannot consume at the rate we're consuming. It's just not sustainable. Can this sort of stuff be mapped on a map? Yes. Often maps would diagram capital flow, and we can use risk as well. There's absolutely no reason why we can't map on it carbon usage. And hopefully, in the software world, with things like the serverless platforms, you're going to see more over time, carbon cost per function. I know Google made an announcement, I think it was yesterday or the day before, about being able to see your carbon footprint in their cloud service. This sort of stuff is excellent news. Chris, any pearls of wisdom to add?
Well, I would outsource this question to persons who do this almost routinely. I'm thinking about Paul Johnson or Chris Adams. So essentially, that type of work requires the person to know both sustainability, Wardley mapping, and perhaps a little bit of your business. So giving a shout in Slack channel, community forum, or anywhere else for help would be probably like the first good step to get started.
Paul, Chris, Sal, all these sorts of people, fantastic, always worth speaking to. So next one, curious about mapping. Can be used with different anchor point than a user. Okay, so all maps have a perspective. And that perspective is your perspective as the person writing the map, and also from the point of view that you're actually looking at. So they're not only imperfect, they are projections of a space. They are not the territory. So often you will have things like maybe the user, maybe the business, maybe government, or you might have different nations. When you draw a map, what you often do as well is the tendency is always to draw the components the way you treat them. You should always try and draw them in terms of the market, and then usually put a dotted red line backwards to where you treat them, because it's quite common for most legacy and most organizations, custom built stuff, which became a commodity a long time ago. And so that's commonplace. So yes, you could have any sort of grouping of users, but when you think about a map, every single component is in fact another map. So they're all anchors of their own maps as well. So it doesn't have to be a user. You could actually use any activity, any practice, any data, any piece of knowledge, any ethical value. You could start with that as the anchor of your map. Chris, any wisdom?
No, not about this one.
Oh, okay, I managed to answer that one correctly. Okay, do you want to pick the next one?
Okay, so although we know that maps are for generating discussion, many people whom I approach with them in business say they look extremely complicated and don't want to use them. How do we best position them as an exploration and shift the perception of accessibility, the no-time executive focus? So I have a set of practices around this, and I'm not sure whether they are suitable for everyone, but I generally believe that you shouldn't be preaching Wardley mapping to anyone. because people essentially don't want to learn Wardley mapping for the sake of Wardley mapping unless you can prove it generates some insights they weren't able to notice earlier, and even if you prove it, they may be quite unhappy because you have shattered their ego. So what I advocate doing is essentially simplifying the maps as much as possible and doing very short introductions. I mean, even skipping the introduction to Wardley mapping, because the evolution terms are almost self-explanatory: genesis, custom build, product, and utility, showing them the value chain one component at a time with a commentary. They will understand it because it's their environment, and then showing in the thinking. If they get the thinking, they will probably like the tool. And it's as simple as that. If not, then you have something to discuss. You will probably get a couple of questions, and maybe after second, third, fifth time, it will finally click. That's my approach.
That's good.
You.
No, often the answer will depend upon how much I like the person. If I don't like the person, I'll tell them to go hire McKinsey, build a mainframe, and spend a load of money on a new Flash office, because those are really simple things. Or if I really dislike them, I'll give them a little 2x2 and just, it does take a little bit of effort, I'm afraid. And some people, they want an instant decision. I think this problem comes from something called Ashby's law of requisite variety. So just to explain it, when you manage an environment, the controlling system managing the environment has to have as much complexity as the inputs and outputs of what you're actually controlling. Now, life, I'm afraid, is complicated and complex. It's all of those things. So you've now got two choices in business part of life. Your two choices are, you can either embrace this and realize that you have to build the capability to communicate and understand this, how those complicated and complex environments, and share it with others. And that requires having a common language or something along those lines. Or you can just pretend it's simple. And we do that all the time. We call those KPIs. So basically, they're just an attempt to pretend life is simple. Give us a 2x2, and because it's quick and easy. There's a phrase which is, as people say, keep it simple, stupid. Kpis, they say, keep it simple, stupid. That's the phrase. Well, life isn't like that. So what they're actually saying is, keep it simple, I'm stupid. As in, I do not want to look at this environment. I do not want to just tell me which lever to pull. So I can, and that is where the consultants come flying in, because they'll happily tell you, as long as you pay them lots of money. Whether it's right or wrong is something completely different, which is why I do like so much Ben's Learn Wardley mapping, where he goes along and he says, if you do the course for 30 days, and if you don't get the money back from the course, 100 times that money, he'll refund you. I think that should be the new standard consultancy model. When I hire a big consultancy for $1 million or 2 million or 5 million or 10 million, if I don't get 100 times that money back within a limited period of time, they should come back and refund me all of my money. I think that should be the future model. So the answer is, I'm afraid, it can be a bit tricky. It takes a little bit of time. People are often not used to this. People have often got a lot of inertia because they've never looked at the environment before. So it can be a bit daunting. I think it's worthwhile. I think people should do this. I mean, if they are very resistant and all the rest of it, don't want to, well, there's not much you can do about it. I wouldn't waste time. Just send them off to a big management consultant and let them spend some money. So next one, Chris.
When you map, the capabilities on the map can be yours or someone else. Any advice on how to manage selecting actors in a map?
Oh gosh. That's an interesting question.
It's a question of purpose, isn't it? All
Yeah.
right, so it's what you are trying to achieve, and this determines who is the main actor, because you can map essentially the same business from a variety of perspectives, and each time your deciding anchor will be different, and actors, I mean, perhaps not will be different, but will be positioned in different places of the map. Right, so it's like the goal determines of who are the actors.
I I totally agree. But I've just seen this other question here. Just going, because I've just noticed we start off with 11 questions. We're about 35 minutes through. We've got 24 to go. So this is like this is getting, the hole is getting deeper and deeper and deeper. There's a fantastic question here, Christoph. Are you mapping every conversation that you're having? Okay, when you can see my hands, I'm just mapping in my mind. The number of conversations, pretty much, when I read books, when I read books, I actually map the stories. I go through, I look at the stories, I start picking out. I don't map science fiction books. I'm terrible. Most of my books are not fiction. They are most of the journals and things that I read, I start mapping them out. Most conversations, I produce maps, and then halfway through the conversation, I start directing it with the map itself. So it's extremely common for me to do that. And if I'm not doing that using my hands, I'm certainly doing that, unfortunately, in my mind these days. Chris, is that the same for you?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. So I rarely make map. I mean, not that rarely, but rather rarely make map on paper. But I tend to use the evolution and a few patterns, like all the time in almost every possible talk.
Now, we've been chatting away so long. I've noticed Steve has just turned up, and also Jane. Now, Steve and Jane, by the way, have organised this event. I've got to say, fantastic. I know there's been a few problems with connections and things like this. These things happen, unfortunately, with events. I must admit, I've loved it so far. It's been brilliant. And I just want to say a huge thank you. You've done such a great job, and I know you're also raising for charities as well. At this point, I should shut up and just hand it over to you. And you're both on mute. That's all right.
Hello.
Hello.
Technical issue number 222. But it's fine.
It's all right. I've got 26 questions I haven't answered. I'm going to have to take a copy of all of these, take them away, and see if I can answer them in tweets or something along those lines. So, but anyway, I'll shut up because I talk far too much, and it is lovely to see you both. And I've got to say, thank you so much for doing this.
No problems at all. Thanks, Simon. Thank you so much for all this opportunity. And thank you to all the fabulous map campers who are doing such fabulous work for us as well, and to all our lovely sponsors. So we have the real pleasure of having some fantastic people joining us from Parkinson's UK, Orangutan Outreach, and Cancer Research. So fingers crossed, technology's working. We will be seeing them real soon, and I'll be asking them just a few minutes to give us a bit of awareness of the charities. And then, fingers crossed, we have a very, very special guest joining us to announce how much we've raised for the charities as well. So we're hoping this is all going to go super smooth. So we'll go from there. So I'm looking everywhere, trying to see when they're going to be joining us soon. So I've enjoyed the map camp so far. It's been dead fun.
You say
a couple of minutes before they're due to join us, so if you want to just answer one more question, Simon, feel free.
Well, I want mystery guess sounds like a bit of X Factor about this one. So at that point, I won't say any more. Oh dear, I remember articles in the Sun of a mystery man in a restaurant. Sorry, me and Steve go back a very, very long time. So as something becomes more commoditized, you also find that it moves down the value chain as new higher level systems appear. So perfectly normal. Things as they commoditize, what happens is you'll notice I often have a dotted line on the value chain, or sometimes I just remove it. It's not really an axis, it's just a point of direction. The chain is constantly expanding, and so as it moves across, it's like the piece of paper grows up that way. We build ever higher order and more complex systems. I wouldn't think of it as an X and Y axis, because that value chain just grows and grows and grows and grows and grows. Is that a fair statement, Chris?
Yep.
Yep. Do we have time to pick any more?
There is one question about the foundation,
Oh, yes.
which I think would be very useful to answer, because it's like, what are you doing with the Wardley Foundation? And
I'm not doing anything with it, but Steve Purkis is going to. So when it came to things like, for example, training, we've got people like Ben doing pragmatic Wardley mapping, and others as well. When it came to certification, we've got the whole Ducati doing that sort of educational front. Conferences, we've got Jane, Steve doing things like Map Camp, and Helga and yourself and others. And so this idea came up for the foundation. And so we needed somebody to sort of lead the foundation. I spent a bit of time, quite a bit of time, a lot of time with Steve, and we talked about all the different ideas and the values and things that it would need. And then it was made a decision that we discussed it amongst ourselves, that Steve wanted to give this a go. But in order to actually get it off the ground, it's actually going to take a bit of capital. And so you ask the question of the community. If the community wants to fund it, then Steve will make it happen. But if the community doesn't want to fund it, then fine. We'll ask the question next year, or maybe the year after, or maybe the year after. At some point in the future, there'll be enough of the community that thinks it's necessary, they're involved. But you know, Steve is going to sort of lead that sort of charge. And I think the ideas behind it, in terms of embedding values, in terms of training and supporting the community, helping other people raise funding and so forth, I think are all positive, good things. So we shall see how it goes.
Brilliant.
Does that answer your question, Chris? Good.
I mean, it wasn't my question, but
that's fair enough. It answers that person's question. At that point, I will now go quiet and hand back over to Steve and Jane.
Thanks so much, Simon. And just to confirm, that's Steve Purkis, not Stevie Hudson. So
Steve Purkis, yes.
So I'm delighted to introduce our lovely sort of representatives from our various charities. So if you would love to say hello, that'd be great. So if we could start off with one of my dearest friends in the world, actually, Richard. I adore you loads, and you're very famous in the Washington Post as well. So this is Richard Zimmerman. He's an absolute star from Orangutan Outreach. So do tell us about what the marvelous things that you've been up to. That would be really fantastic.
Hello, everyone. It's great to be here, and thanks for the intro, Steve. We've known each other a long time through my wife, who couldn't quite be with us. She's here in spirit, but she's busy with work right now. Gosh, I've been doing orangutan outreach. I started it almost 15 years ago. Which you probably remember, Steve. It was just a dream from someone who's obsessed with orangutans and saving them in the wild. And I've grown it into a powerhouse of an organization supporting projects in Borneo and Sumatra, rescuing orangutans, rehabilitating them, releasing them, caring for them. And between all of our partnerships in our network, there's hundreds and hundreds of orangutans under our watch. So we're just thrilled to be here, and always thrilled to meet new people and really teach them about orangutans and how much we love them and how awesome they are and how much we want to save them. So I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Richard. You're a star. That's absolutely amazing. Sonia, do welcome to our wonderful little session here, and all the MAP campers are super keen to hear from all of you. So obviously you're from lovely Cancer Research UK. It would be absolutely fantastic to hear about the cool things that you've been up to as well. That'd be amazing.
Hello, so I'm Sonia from Cancer Research UK. So as we're all aware, the last 18 months have been quite different. So myself personally, I've been working from home a lot. But what we have done throughout the pandemic is really try and raise the awareness of how cancer and people going to the GPs and getting diagnosis have really been affected throughout the pandemic. So we've been working a lot with the government, GP bodies, to try and encourage people to still go to their doctors. We are aware that a lot of people have missed out on routine screening over the pandemic, and really trying to get people to, if they've missed them, please rebook them now, that hopefully GPs are now taken face to face. We've made some changes in the charity, and we are working on lots of new research to try and bring the day where more cancers are cured, and that hopefully 3 in 4 people will survive cancer. So it's certainly been a very different year or so, but we have certainly hit some amazing achievements in this last year, and COVID did not stop us.
That's so exciting to hear. So thanks, just goes to prove about the great humanity that we have, and that's what we're trying to achieve as well. So, which is brilliant. So on that lovely note there from there as well, Tom, so lovely to see you. And obviously, you know, you're very personal to me as well, because my mum suffers from Parkinson's and dementia. So that's another reason why we've got Parkinson's UK, and Jane's very connected to cancer research, and obviously I'm connected to all of you really. So Tom, it'll be absolutely fantastic to hear what about Parkinson's UK and what you're trying to achieve as well. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. And just a huge thank you to you guys for nominating us and giving us this opportunity, and some great charities and causes that you've chosen. So I'm Tom, I'm Corporate Partnerships Manager at Parkinson's UK. And with Parkinson's UK, the UK charity that supports people living with Parkinson's. And many of you will know someone who's been affected by Parkinson's, but you may not know what Parkinson's actually is. It's a pretty brutal and difficult condition to live with, and kind of what Sonia said as well. It's been a difficult year for people living with Parkinson's who, you know, our local groups haven't been meeting. There haven't been that face-to-face interaction. But yeah, we've had you know, launching virtual emergency appeals to try and keep the funding coming through with the lack of events that have been happening. So being able to come and talk to you guys is a great opportunity to do that. But yeah, for us, our focus is on supporting people living with Parkinson's, and then funding the research that's needed to kind of find a cure for Parkinson's. And yeah, 144,000 people live in the UK with Parkinson's. And if you know 66 people, you'll know someone living with Parkinson's. But you may not know what the condition is. It's a condition that has about 40 symptoms, ranging from, you know, mental health conditions to the more well-known, the tremors, the freezing of your kind of motor symptoms. So yeah, it's a really difficult, it's traditionally seen as an older person's disease, but actually, or condition, I should say, but actually 10% of people living with Parkinson's are under the age of 50. So, and it's the fastest growing neurological condition in the world. So yeah, the more help that we can get out there in terms of raising awareness, using these opportunities, it really helps to actually give the true picture of what Parkinson's actually is. So yeah, big thank you from us.
Thank you so much all the time. So just a quick question as we're waiting for a certain person for us to join. What would you really like to see happen in the next sort of like years for yourself? You know, if you looked at your personal charities and wanted to have an achievement, just one small thing, because I know that's what it's all about for us, isn't it? So it's just if we could just change 1% in our particular charity or life or career, what would that be for you? Anyone, I don't mind.
I'll start then. So for me, I would like to see the stigmas around visiting the GP to potentially be crushed a little bit more. And we need to also appreciate that cancer doesn't affect a particular age range. It affects everybody. No one is, you know, not going to be caught with cancer. Every age can be affected. It doesn't matter who you are, where you come from. And we've noticed, particularly in the pandemic, a lot of younger generations find out they've got cancer. They've gone through social media and really used social media to highlight their treatments and their struggles through the pandemic. For me, I would like to really see more people going back to the doctors, getting those screenings so we can catch people earlier, because cancer has a higher survival rate and a better treatment plan if caught earlier. And it's just heartbreaking to see people in the later stages of treatment, because it has that rippling effect once one person is affected by cancer, so many are. So fingers are crossed, more people will go back to the doctors, and I'm really working towards reducing the stigmas, sharing things like how to check for signs and symptoms with breast cancer, because it affects male and female. And it's a very big stigma around males thinking it won't affect them, but breast cancer does. So that for me would be an amazing thing to try and achieve.
Fantastic. What about you, lovely Rich? What do you feel?
Gosh, an end to deforestation, for starters. It's what we'd like. But basically in Indonesia, all these orangutans who are currently at rehabilitation and care centers sitting in cages, we'd like to get them out of the cages as quickly as possible and into safe areas of forest so that they can live free and God willing breed, because babies are the secret to the future. And the ones that can't be released, we would really like to be able to build them sanctuary spaces that aren't cages, because animals in cages is absolutely what we're trying to stop. So that's our goal: animals out of cages and into forests breeding.
Brilliant. That's fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Tom. I'll come back to you a bit later. I do have the marvelous pleasure and absolute dream to have one of my best friends come and join us today. Thank you so much for joining us. This is the most amazing friend of my life, as well as Rich as well. Can I introduce Alexandra Burke? Thank you very much for joining us.
Oh, hello, Stevie, babe. How are you?
I'm delighted.
How's it gone today so far?
Well, Jane and I and the rest of the crew had a very interesting tech issues, but we're all here and it's all fabulous. And
oh gosh, yeah, tech issues are the worst. And I wouldn't stop you because I'm the worst at anything that involves technology, to be honest.
Cool.
But Jane, did you sort it out or was it Stevie?
Give you two guesses.
I think Jane. Was it you, Jane? Absolutely brilliant. Okay, so guys, I just wanted to say, well, I'm here. Steve has asked me to come on and announce how much has been raised. And it's very exciting because when I was actually told how much has been raised, I just think it's really generous of people to donate their money and stuff because they know what it's going to and the outreach that it will bring to others and stuff. So I'm going to say how much it is, but I'm going to let Steve tell me when I'm allowed to. When am I allowed to say it, Steve? Or have you talked about this already? Because so I don't want to share news that people already know.
So map campers and the world. So the lovely Alexandra is about to announce how much we've raised. I think if we all do a clap roll to sort of introduce to the money, that would be a relevant or a Mexican wave.
Roll, hold
yes,
on.
Yes, really cool. Yes, let's go do that. This is Alexandra's back garden.
And I'll get Bella involved. Are we ready?
Yes.
Come on. 12,000 pounds.
Oh. Thank you, Alex. Bella's really happy
Bella's
too.
really excited. You know what I mean?
So we will be dividing that all equally to the charities. We are on a bit of a timeline because we have to let the green next session start and everything else. But from my bottom of my heart, Alex, thank you so much. You're a darling.
Oh, you're welcome, darling. And next time I'll be a part of this properly when I'm not in the studio, and I'll make more time. I promise.
Okay, that's so sweet of you. Thank you very much.
Lots
to our lovely charity. Go on, darling. Lots of love, my lovely. So to
take care,
Richard. See, I'm getting all too excited. Come on, Alex, you can go.